All right. Hello, hello. I'm Magi, and today we're interviewing
Andrew Smith.
Andrew over here is a developer for Spilt Milk Studios.
Correct. Hello, lovely to meet you.
Tell us more about yourself.
The short version is I always wanted to get into video games ever since I was about 6 or 7. Managed to go to university and study for it, and I've been making games since 2004, which is terrifying. I set up Spilt Milk Studios about 14 years ago. It'll be 15 in March, which is crazy. And yeah, I guess I'm a designer, a game designer by trade. If I had to point to one skill to identify myself,
So, how big is Spilt Milk Studios these days? Like,
so
including you?
there's like 10, 11 of us. We have a mix of permanent full-time staff and then some real regular contributors, contractors, that sort of thing, and then a couple of people who are a little more part-time. So yeah, nice little group.
Are you all also based in the UK and work there, or do a lot of people work from home from all over the world?
So, well, we are remote first, and we have worked with people all over the place. But right now, we are almost everyone is in the UK, various places: Liverpool, London, Oxford, Manchester, all over the shop. And then we've got one over in America.
I see, I see. Why is your studio called Spilt Milk Studios?
Because it's memorable and because it makes people interested, right? I remember, I half remember trying to come up with a studio name and failing, and then my girlfriend at the time suggested something like this, either don't cry over spilt milk or something like that, and then Spilt Milk Studios. It rolls off the tongue. It's nice to say. It's unique. It's memorable. I think it has a bit of a sense of humor or something, a bit of a twist, so I think people remember it.
I see, I see. And what other games aside from Trash Goblin have you made over the years? Since you mentioned you made a bunch.
Yeah, so early days we made a game called Hardlines, which was kind of like a Snake update for mobile phones. That was back in sort of 2011, 12, something like that, early
Hmm.
iPhone days. We've made a lot of games, so I won't go through all of them. We've made a game on Steam in 20, I think 14, 15, called Tango Fiesta. That was our first published title through another publisher. It was kind of like an 80s throwback top-down 2D shooter kind of a thing. Um, and we have done a bunch of work for hire, some of which we can't talk about.
Oh, for
And
sure.
we've obviously, and then we've actually got a weird history of games that were on interesting and new technology that you can't play anymore. So there was a thing for about 2 years. We were working on a platform called Crater, which was kind of a new take on Roblox, if you like. That got bought by Meta, and then it got shut down. So you can't play any of the games that we made there. We made 3 or 4 games on that platform. But yeah, it's the story of an indie dev.
Reminds me a bit of the games platform that Google had for quite a while for Google Chrome, I believe it was. And you could play
Mm,
Bastion on there and some other games. And then it was shut
yes.
down eventually as well.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a real shame. But these things happen, and at least some people got to enjoy them for a little bit. And yeah, right now we're working on Trash Goblin, so it's all very exciting.
Yeah, very exciting catalog of games there from Tango Fiesta and King of Crabs to Trash Goblin.
Absolutely, it's a weird path that we've wandered along, but we're here now.
So, what was the biggest inspiration for Trash Goblin?
Well, it's a bit of a complex one. I'll try and simplify it, but it kind of came from two places. One was the sort of what I would say is probably the more obvious. Their whole idea of kind of soothing, chill, vibes-based games that are becoming really popular. Games like, I guess, Power Wash Sim is one of the biggest and most successful, but things like Unpacking, a little to the left, games that are about sort of menial tasks or small tasks that
Mm,
aren't necessarily challenging in themselves. That was something that we thought was really interesting. And then the more complex piece was a very very long time ago. I think probably sort of honestly 2013 or something like that. I had an idea as a designer, as I mentioned, I'm a designer, and I have sometimes you have ideas that you're like a theme and a game mechanic pairing together, you just feel like, oh, that's got to be a perfect sort of pairing. And I'm a big fan of Picross games. I don't know if you know what those
Hmm.
are. They're also
Yeah.
called nanograms. Yeah. So I really like those games, and the idea of etching away kind of the negative space around something to find an object. I was like, that's kind of like a gameplay version of archaeology almost, right? You know, digging through the dirt to find the thing that's valuable. Um, and then you fast forward, you know, a long time, and we do a lot of work at Spilt Milk Studios with students in universities across the UK. So there's a couple in particular. Anglia Ruskin was this particular one. We set uh, they call them industry briefs. So we'll set a brief as if we're a client, and a team of students will make the game, and they will get, you know, marked, and it will contribute towards their grades. But we get to act like a bit of a client, so we kind of set some design parameters, and that was one of the ones that we did. Where I was like, oh, actually, do you know what? That would be interesting. I think it's small enough that a student team could really tackle it and see where it went. And so yeah, they made a game sort of prototype, a demo that was literally a sort of a 3D Picross set in a little world of archaeology. It was quite cartoony, but that gave us the sort of confidence that, as you know, having played Trash Goblin, the chipping mechanic, this
Hmm.
idea of chipping away the dirt to discover something. Now, in that demo, it was very successful. We really liked it, but it was still a puzzle game. You know, it was still something that involved, you know, logic and maths and numbers. And yeah, those that plus the kind of the idea of chill games kind of combined. And then the third bit, I told you it was complicated, was kind of a world that we've been building across multiple sort of prototypes and game jams and that sort of thing that we really believed in. And that's kind of where the goblin comes from, and the shop and the kind of the art style. So yeah, you thought it was a simple question, and I gave a really, really long answer.
No, I love long answers. For what it's worth, you know, there's a lot to game development. There's a lot of people who prototype ideas and create these sort of worlds and everything, and it becomes sometimes a bit overscoped as a
Mm,
result as well. There's a lot of people who bite off more than they can chew. So it's pretty interesting to see that you went from like having a prototype made as like part of basically a client's work thing for students at uni, to
yeah.
creating this game, you know. And I can definitely see like the Picross sort of influence and the Menil test. I once had to create a negative, like I had to once use clay to form something, and then used plaster to create a negative of it, and had to scratch off the clay and then fill it in
Yeah.
with cement, and it was a whole ordeal. And it really reminded me of that. And yeah,
Oh, fabulous. Yeah. I mean, Trash Goblin now, you'd be, unless, as soon as you're told that there was Picross there in that chipping, I think people are like, oh, I can see the ghost of it, you know?
yeah.
I kind of get it, but I don't think anyone would make the sort of the jump on their own. But that whole tactile side of it, the chipping away, the uncovering something, that all still maintained really nicely. So yeah, yeah.
So yeah, in Trash Goblin, you are a shopkeeper of sorts. You get this magical trash bag that has a lot of trash that your aunt is digging up for you in
Mm,
there, and you chip away at the dirt to uncover these trinkets that need to be cleaned and possibly upcycled.
hmm.
What sort of did you take any inspirations from other like shopkeeping sims as well, or are you a fan of shopkeeping sims in general?
So we didn't specifically go looking.
Mhm.
I'm more interested personally in shop sims that are a bit more um, balanced with things other than the shop sim side, if you
Mhm.
like. So some Moonlighter, I think, is a really good example. You know, it's almost half shop sim, half action RPG.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, and I really like that balance. And so for us, the big kind of the big kind of push for us was this: if this was going to be sort of, you know, cozy and wholesome, all those good things, but also chilled and have very little friction. We wanted the player to never really be in a position where they felt like they were like losing out or failing. Right?
Yeah.
It's a very sort of positive game in that sense. So we didn't really lean into the research of the more traditional shop sim games where, I mean, I'm sort of being a bit glib, but you know, there's sort of there's never going to be spreadsheets in Trash Goblin. That's just not like a cozy thing, you know. Some people find that very entertaining, and that's fabulous. But that full sort of, like, the word simulation is probably in sort of lowercase for us. It's more like a shop game, shop management game in a more sort of abstract sense. So yeah, it's about that fantasy of owning and running a shop rather than the reality of it, I suppose.
Yeah, I know folks who, for instance, got into Moonlighter because it seemed cozy, but losing items was like very frustrating to them because it hampers their progress. They didn't get the
Mm.
crafting materials to upgrade their gear, and nothing to sell to then upgrade their gear further or upgrade their shop or something like that with the money. So I can see that in Trash Goblin, it's more so you're fulfilling requests basically, and see what you have on
Mm.
hand, work towards that, etc. And it's indeed very cozy, very comfortable, and I can see how that influenced your design choices there. There's a lot of sort of quests in the world, which I found very interesting, like that lizard guy, I forgot his name,
Donegal.
Donoval, right, who
Yeah, yeah.
keeps asking for bedpans. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, he's a fan favorite.
Yeah. Or like the mushroom people who have to remind themselves that not everyone speaks telepathically, or
Yeah.
other sort of clients that you get. You mentioned that these are part of a world that you thought of across different prototypes. Where did you get the inspiration from there, or can you tell us more about the world in general?
Sure, sure. So, like the kind of the original idea for the Picross archaeology game, it's been a long time coming. So it's I would say that the foundation and seeds of it were planted a very long time ago, and then only recently have they really kind of grown into what you see here. So, um, originally, there was a game prototype that we made called Waterways, which was set in a kind of a fantasy city that was very much modeled on sort of Venice, but by way of Dungeons and Dragons. So it was all canals and boats and things like that. And it was actually like a really, I mean, this was in 2000 and I want to say 14 or 15. This was like a back then we didn't know what we were making. Now it would probably be called like a roguelite single player extraction game.
Hmm.
But basically, you would hop on and off of a boat and rummage around this empty city, trying to avoid fights with deadly enemies, that sort of thing. Anyway, that was the first point at which I started to think about this fantasy world and the rules that governed it. And we had this idea of a city that was built on the brink of this enormous chasm, and that nobody knew what was in the chasm except that it was essentially an open cast mine, if you like. There's just if you can get down the edge, you can go as deep as you safely can and find whatever treasures and things you'd like to, as well as ores and things like that. And from there, we built this idea of how do we make that interesting in a sort of fantasy world, and eventually we ended up on this idea of a thing called vibrance, which is a sort of energy that I suppose we would call almost like the karmic balance or the cosmic balance or Mother Nature. So the idea that there is a force that is trying to kind of maintain an equilibrium, and all of the actions that sentient creatures take kind of are not in opposition, but they pull it in different ways. And so we've run with that essentially. And I don't want to get too much into it, but essentially we came up with this place where almost anything you can imagine can happen in a very literal sense. So if you believe in something strongly enough, you are able to kind of bend reality a little bit. And so through that, we were able to really kind of just run with whatever ideas we wanted. Now it's not that simple. We didn't come up with it and then go, oh wow, we can just do whatever we want. There's still rules, there's still limits, there's still kind of logic and that sort of thing, because I think that's required. But it's interesting that you're picking up on that stuff, because Trash Goblin itself, when we were designing it very early on, we did see hope. As most game developers, I think we like what would happen if it was really successful and we get to like do more in this world. And we wanted to sort of have a game where and that's what Trash Goblin's doing, where it brings the world to you. So we're not having to build this enormous fantasy world and all of the, the sights and the sounds and the environments as a small team. We're building one environment, and then the world's coming to you through the citizens of this city, this big metropolis. They're coming from all over the world. And so that was quite exciting for us to be able to kind of bring these characters in and start sort of dropping little hints and referencing things that we can maybe build on one day. So I'm really glad it's kind of resonating.
Yeah, it definitely is. the game is very positively received at the moment. It's still, in early access, and I hope
Mm.
that it enables, like, the success of this one enables you to possibly create even more games in this sort of universe. I found the mushroom people endearing. The lizards are pretty cool. Like, amphibians and reptiles alike are pretty. Like, there's frog people. I
Mm,
mean,
mm.
more so salmon. I don't know. I don't want to be specious here, but basically, those people are pretty cool, and there's a lot of humans and other humanoid creatures. Another part of the world as well are the objects that you find, like the different
Mm.
trinkets. What is sort of your favorite trinket that exists in the game already?
Oh gosh, my favorite trinket. That's a really good question. I think my favorite at the moment is probably the grandma's egg, just because of the way people react to it. Um,
I figured.
yeah, I really enjoy how much people kind of obsess with it, or kind of go, oh god, it's really creepy and weird, I don't want it. Like, it seems to be quite divisive in that sense. Excuse me. But yeah, I think anything that like generates such an emotional response, and particularly like things like masks, things that people can kind of like imagine using, or imagine like bringing out of the game into the real world, I think those are particularly effective as well. But yeah, I think probably the grandma's egg is there at the minute. That'll change, I'm sure.
Yeah, I really hated Grandma's Egg at first, and then I saw how much it gets sold for, and I was like, yeah, I love this thing. All of a sudden, I don't know, I don't understand why it gets sold for so much gold, but hey, if people love it, I'll love it.
Yeah.
And the masks as well, like there's the goblin mask and this sort of orc-ish mask, for instance,
Mm, mm.
and like the humanoid mask as well, and just being able to add different objects to them is hilarious. Like with the what is it? Like an orc sort of helmet, and there's a tooth missing, and you can add like an actual denture in there or like a blade and stuff.
Yeah,
Was
yeah.
that sort of tinkering and upcycling mechanic always part of the idea initially when
It
you
was.
started like really working on Trash Goblin after the prototype, or did that came
Yes,
about
yeah.
somewhere later?
So yeah, once we had the idea of the customers, the shop, and the chipping, and the just discovering the trinkets. I mean, obviously, we were like, okay, this, and once we were confident people enjoyed that, it's like the next natural step is you've got this dirty thing, so you should clean it, and it should sell for more. And then we had a range of mechanics, and we still do on paper at least, and in various states of prototype, that hey, we may or may not see at some point during early access or afterwards. But the upcycling was one. We were like, it just comes out of that kind of making the most out of all this trash that you get sent. You're like, well, what if you could just combine it and turn it into things, and giving the player the freedom to do that just seemed very much on message, if you like.
Hmm.
The goblins in our fiction are very, very practical. They're very hands-on, they're very sort of inventive. And we thought that was just a fun thing to make part of the gameplay, so that players kind of like identify that with that sort of in the first person sense. And yeah, I think just seeing the creativity that we've got inside the community is amazing. Seeing the kind of requests that people have for like more combination possibilities and that sort of thing is really, really exciting. And we always intended for it to be as freeing as possible. We didn't really want to limit it in any real sense. There was a period where, and I'm sure most people would understand this, where we were kind of like, is it going to just make everything look bad if we literally just stick things together? Is that going, there are going to be things that clip, that kind of merge a bit weirdly. There's going to be imperfections across the board, but ultimately, I think the joy of just that experimentation, plus the decisions we made with the aesthetic, everything's a bit cobbled together, a bit wonky, a bit sort of worn, and I think it really works nicely. So we early on decided that it would be a bad idea, or we should try it without kind of smoothing the edges, if you like. Something that's really weird to think about is how Tears of the Kingdom came out during our development, and it has the master hand, is it called? I can't remember. Where you're just gluing objects together, physical objects, and creating all these weird contraptions that have engines and wheels and things. And that has a kind of a green magical substance that kind of shows you where the items are gluing together. And we did consider doing something a bit like that. We're like, will we need a kind of a visual connection, or can we just kind of like slap them together and leave it at that? And so far, we've not needed to do it. Time will tell, I suppose, but I don't think anyone misses it. I think people just really enjoy the silliness of it.
It is a lot of silliness. I found, for instance, one of those arm prosthetic thingies that pirates have,
Hmm.
and I added a blade to it. I was like, this is better than a hook.
Yeah, you
But
can imagine pirates sort of being right. I've got several of these, one for every kind of fight that I could get into.
yeah, I'd imagine you could also use it as like for a leg stump, and your kicks get even deadlier. Yeah, Trash Goblin is very creative in that regard. I also like how you can choose to spend your money differently
Mm,
with like the decorations, for instance, but also like the upgrades that you earn.
yeah.
Um, will there be an option to possibly move around objects like decoration and everything? Like at the moment, it's just, oh, you have got these static objects that you can get essentially, like a candle, for instance, or some plants. Perhaps will there be something that allows you to customize your layer, your Tinkerer's layer, or your little shop a bit more?
Yes, there will. There will. So we intend that players will be able to customize the sort of the cosmetics, the aesthetics of their shops quite a lot at some point. And um, as far as moving things around, like the static objects, like the shelves and things, I would love for that to happen. But there's obviously a lot of interesting challenges with physical objects. If someone stacks trinkets on it and then tries to move it, and then all the lovely little edge cases that will come out of it, that would be lovely. I don't think the game needs it, but if enough people ask for it, then it's something that we would respond to. It's one of the nice things about early access is we can just get kind of a real temperature of what people want and how excited they are for different things, and then we can kind of adapt our plan. So um, I think I think it's safe to say that we will be improving and expanding all of that side of the game quite a lot, because people really, really sort of want to make the space their own. And the real balance will just be the complexity of it. How rich we can make that versus kind of the amount of bugs it adds, basically, because we don't want it to feel like an early access game. We want it to feel super, super polished.
Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of updates as well. I mean, we've got the tinkering, the full of beans and festive updates. Festive is the next one, I believe, right?
It is, yeah. We're working on it right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's gonna be like in the roadmap at least it says deep clean and spirit of customer service and delving deep updates. What can we expect in the future that you can already spoil a little bit without saying too much?
Sure thing. I'll try and walk the tightrope. So, one thing I will say actually is that I would hope that as we get further along the roadmap, we can get a bit more specific, so that we would
Mhm.
be able to share a little bit more about things that people can look forward to. At the very start, when we built that roadmap, we just wanted to kind of hint at it, give a little clue, but without kind of making promises that we then are like, oh no, we can't do that, or we can't take it
Obviously,
as far as we
obviously.
wanted. Yeah, it's the usual thing, isn't it? But yeah, so the deep clean, we're going to be addressing quite a lot of work on the cleaning gameplay. We want to kind of like improve it and perhaps expand it. The delving deep, I will say that is somehow related to the chasm that I was talking about.
Mhm.
And the spirit of customer service, I think that's my favorite name for one of the updates, because it actually gives two quite big clues about the sort of thing that we'll be tackling. But I think it's safe to say that if someone thinks that this sort of game should include a mechanic of a certain kind, we will almost certainly be including it before early access finishes in 1.0. But we're also fully intending to carry on updating it afterwards. So 1.0 will not be the end. It's just like another beginning, really.
That's fantastic. I love it when devs keep updating a game after the 1.0 onwards.
Mm.
Specifically, the deep clean update is something that I'm looking forward to because, quite honestly, the cleaning is my least favorite
Yeah,
mechanic at the moment.
yeah.
Are there any plans to have I don't know, running water, for instance, or perhaps a mechanic where you can leave something to soak for a bit.
I will just say watch this space.
Oh, okay, seriously. Okay, okay. But yeah, like it's a pretty interesting game. I really think that it fits that sort of Power Wash meets Baldur's Gate kind of description that a lot of people seem to use
Yeah.
these days. What is your favorite character in the game out of a bunch that are introduced so far in the early access?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Or favorites?
Yeah, yeah, I know, right? It's really tough, isn't it? I I really like Ortichi, the orc trainer from the mercenaries. They go back to a different prototype entirely. A few of these characters actually come from a prototype that we built a while back.
Hmm.
And so I guess part of it is the link to that because you never like to see a game idea die completely. But also I just I've always liked orcs. I used to play Warhammer a lot, and I was always playing the orcs. So yeah.
um,
Who's your favorite?
I'm I like Mushroomio a lot, but he kind of annoys me too. It's a weird love-hate relationship sometimes with Mushroomio, especially because I bring him a guitar and he says he wants a lute, and then I bring him something else and it's still not a lute, and I was just like, just take the instrument.
If it
um,
was that good, he'd be able to make it work, right? Yeah,
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 probably,
yeah.
but
Pip, our writer, will be very delighted to hear that description. That it's a love hate. I think that is perfect. That was the goal.
yeah, honestly, I just want him to take the instrument and leave me. But I think my favorite is like absolute favorite that I don't also get annoyed by is Redouar or
Hmm.
Redoir. I don't know how to say it. Um,
Redwar, yeah, yeah.
yeah, who brings us the upside cleanse? It's just, and also the stranger who we definitely haven't met before, and who we definitely met for the very first time one day during the um you know.
Oh, I know. If you know, you know. Absolutely,
Yeah, if you
absolutely.
know, you know.
Yeah, I think a close second for me is Soakar because I just like I like not telling people whether Soakar's the bird or the girl, and just letting that run. It's fun.
It's I want, my head canon is it's for birds because it would be
Right.
funnier.
Interesting. Interesting.
It would be funnier.
I'll never tell.
Yeah. I like Holifer a lot based on just the design.
Mm. Little nerdy librarian. He's fab, isn't he?
Yeah, and
He's great.
he's just carrying all those books and scrolls on his head as well, and he's like one of the first introductions into these sort of mushroom people. I like his mossy beard and everything. He got very very kind eyes, and he seems like a huge nerd for all the best reasons.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Right. The
And has
the
to
the
then
sort of the
yeah, like
perfect nerd.
especially with that, like the most memorable bit about him was like the way he describes the magnifying glass, and when you select the glass eye, he says no, the other thing. And he wants the glass bit and the metal bit, and like, okay.
Yeah, he's a little rusty communicating verbally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the Trash Goblin has got many many endearing characters, and I think that's part of the charm that it has. Like, it has the storytelling through these characters that come to this town, but also you're a little goblin. You're tinkerer.
Hmm.
I guess you're a trinkerer.
I like that.
Uh,
We might use
yeah, there we go. You're welcome. Pay me later.
it.
I also, what I find very interesting is that um, you get to upgrade your storage space in terms of like shelves that you can just put out
Mm,
everywhere.
mm.
But sometimes that's not enough. And sometimes you've got your bag as well, and then you start piling up these objects in on like your workbench and on the you know the shop window, the
Mhm.
drive-through basically. And it's kind of hilarious. There's like a screenshot on the Steam page with all the bottles, but I I I lately have just been keeping around the grandma's eggs a lot and some of the instrument parts because I never get like the other handle. Uh,
Yep. Yep.
Is that something you just expected people to do, or are there any other weird habits that people have in the community?
We hoped they would do that, right? I think, one of the big sort of guiding principles for us was just letting people be the goblin they want to be. So if they want to be messy, they can be messy, and we won't penalize them. If they want to be neat and tidy, they can do that too. So, all of that means that we just let people do what they want, right? It kind of like means we don't have to think too hard about all the to sort of guide players down one way of playing, which is good. But yeah, I think the biggest surprise is the variety of ways that people have set up their shops, and the we as developers, we tend to play it one way because at any given time we're basically concentrating on one mechanic or one area of the game. So we were all a bit more I would say close in how we sort of arranged our spaces and what items we were fans of, and then just seeing how different people enjoy different things. And I think there's one member of the community who I think is everyone's favorite at the moment, who has been collecting all of the masks and like giving them names and like setting them up all differently, which I just think is brilliant. We never expected people to kind of like turn the trinkets into pets and things like that, which is just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, the masks especially are very well designed in my opinion. Also, I'm never
Mm.
sure if like a goblin mask is a mask for a goblin or if it's a mask that is supposed to look like a goblin. It's a very
Well,
ambiguous
I could
game.
I could tell you that that's technically a piece of kit. So it has a lantern attachment
Hmm.
um, on the sort of horn that comes out the front. So it's for a very particular job that we haven't really introduced yet in terms of the NPCs and the customers. But one day we will.
One day, perhaps for the delving deep.
Well, well.
Who knows? Who knows? Update. Are there any plans for like a sort of overarching main story? I mean, we've got the sort of, I called them quests earlier, but it's sort
Mm.
of these side quests that you've got, side story bits, I guess, storylines. But we've got individual stories that are spun alongside of each other, and you just kind of get with the little bits and pieces here and there as you progress through the game. Will there be sort of an overarching thing that connects these characters, or perhaps affects is about you and your shop, or can we expect
Absolutely.
something along those lines?
Absolutely, yeah. It's something that we really, really care about is that the game, you can keep playing it for hours and hours and hours, and that's wonderful that people are doing that. And it was always intended, but we do want people to be able to kind of get in, go through a lovely story, and then feel like they've finished. And yeah, we have some grand plans for the story and the goblins' role in the city and the different people and organizations there. And yeah, it'll expand on some of the stuff that players have seen in the game as it stands. So some of the characters will be kind of in that main line sort of main quest, and then we will also supply quite a lot of what we call side quests, but which at the moment you're talking about like the named characters essentially. So um, the I think there's probably a point in the game at the minute where it kind of almost turns into the side quests as we envision them moving forwards. But because we don't have the full story yet, they don't seem that way. So I think probably from the point where you get the upcycler, that's where the sort of the game opens up a little bit, or at least it will. So you'll be able to follow the main storyline at your pace, but then at any given time you can kind of go, do you know what? There's never going to be a timer or a rush or any pressures. So you could just decide that, you know what, I'm going to take my time with this and I'm just going to sell to random strangers, or I might see Donoval turn up again and he might want even more bedpans, and I'll go off on that. So yeah, we want a really nice balance basically. But I think we've said on the Steam page, and I think we're confident in this, although things change. We're aiming for about 10 hours of sort of an inverted commas story. So from the point where you start playing to the point where you've kind of finished the story, we would expect to take sort of up to 10 hours. And then, I mean, really, we think there's probably 2 hours of linear, well, maybe 3 hours of linear content in the game as it stands, but we're seeing people play for 40 plus hours. So I can imagine people will start, I mean, the maths there just scares me, the amount of time people might play on our game, but it's wonderful to see.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff already in the game, and this obviously not every game in this sort of you're doing menial tasks to take your mind off of things. Not every game needs a story.
Mm.
Like Hard Space Shipbreaker, for instance, is one game that I really adore that I played way too much of.
Yeah, yeah.
And eventually had this sort of fighting against the exploitative company Lynx and unionizing and all of that story. And I really didn't think it needed it necessarily. I just wanted to keep breaking apart ships. But Moonlighter, for instance, has a very simple you trying to get to that 1/5 door, and Resetia, for instance, has a very kind of it adds a little bit of pressure that you have to pay off your debt in increasing increments as you progress
Mm.
through the game, and eventually you're free and can keep on playing. It's kind of cool. Like I think it can add a lot to a game, and especially if if it ends up the way you say it is, where everyone can tackle it at their own pace, I think it adds a lot to a game, especially if you can keep playing afterwards too.
Yeah, that's crucial for us. It's the balance is, we want people to feel like, oh, if they want to just meet all these cool characters and get really emotionally invested and see that story through, they can, but it will never feel like they're missing content if they do that. And then on the flip side, we never want players who are like, I just want to run my goblin shop to feel like they're being prodded to complete the story. Do you know? So yeah, it's really interesting hearing you talk about it, and especially in relation to other games, because yeah, it's very important to us. So fingers crossed we get that balance right.
What was your biggest reason to head into early access?
I think so. We are quite a small team, and the game, despite being relatively small scale, you're in a shop. There's a lot of content, and a lot of ways you can mix that content. And so a big part of it for us was just seeing like the opportunity to have more people play it and really kind of make sure it's up to snuff in that sense. And then also we're very big on like proof, if you like. So when we first came up with the game idea internally, it was like, okay, is the team excited? Are ideas spilling out of them? Okay, yes, good. Okay, that's a small sample size, but that's some proof that it's maybe worth taking to the next step. And then as soon as we had it playable, we were getting it in front of people who weren't on the team. Do they like it? No, they don't like the numbers in the chipping puzzles. Okay, let's take the numbers out. Okay, they like everything else. Brilliant. So that was more proof. The Kickstarter was proof. The fact that people funded it. It was like, okay, there's an audience who want to give money for this. And so now the early access is proving out on a much bigger scale what size is that audience, and what is it really honestly that people are excited about, and how are they playing. I said earlier, as a developer you play it a certain way and you can get kind of trapped. You don't play it like a real player, so getting that real audience reaction, and it's just been fantastic. I mean, like I was saying, some people have played it for honestly flabbergasting amounts of time compared to what we expected. We thought if you went through it really quickly, there's 3 hours of content. If you took your time, it's probably 5, to the point where you get to just the endless random customers. And yet, yeah, people are playing for, a quarter of the audience, I think, has played for like 10 hours plus. That's twice what we thought. So even that is like interesting, because what does that mean? What does that mean for our plans? Do we change or adapt, or how does that affect what we thought about the game? And all of that is just so useful. So we just really value it. And the third prong, I guess, the third pillar was really, let's start making some money off of it, so that we can really kind of balance the effort and the scope. Like one of the big things is you see how much money it's making every month, and then you're like, okay, we can change and adapt. Like, do we throw more effort at it, less effort? Like, how do we navigate all of that? So it's just really exciting, and this is the first time we've self-published a game on Steam of this scale. So it's a really big learning process, and it just all of that combined. I suppose you asked for one thing, but I think I gave you four. So
No, that's it's great. Would you say that having a publisher would be more limiting, perhaps, or would it? Do you think it would give you more freedom theoretically?
I think most publishers these days are quite happy to let you have creative freedom, but I think that we are able to act more quickly, respond more sort of agilely to the audience, because we're talking directly to them. I think with a publisher, a lot of the time that the communication would go through them, and so you're not exposed to like the truth, the reality. I'm not saying they would change it, but it just takes time. And one of the things that we're trying to do is have like a nice regular update cadence, and I think that would be affected in some way. And I think just having like that one-to-one conversation like we're having right now, you're talking to the creative director of the project, and that may or may not happen if you have to go through a PR representative or this, that, and the other. And I think we both get stuff out of it. Just hearing how you talk about the game is feeding me with ideas and information that I wouldn't get otherwise. So it's not just out of the kindness of our hearts. We definitely get something out of it. But it's important to us to foster a community around this game, and then maybe the next one if it's set in the same world. So that's touching on that kind of like wider world that we were talking about earlier. So it's just really important for us. I think we're as free as we like. A publisher would perhaps have given us more money to spend on it before we hit market,
Hmm.
perhaps. But the financial reality of it is that we are 10 people, and so if we're not splitting the money that we get out of this in half, then we get a lot more out of it, and then the game gets a lot more out of it as well. So yeah, it's not really about the freedom, I would say, but it's about the things on the edges.
Yeah, I was just interested because there's a lot of conversation these days, especially around indie developers and publishers, and that you
Mm.
don't need to have a publisher necessarily for your game. Um, and also, I was curious, especially since you had like a Kickstarter campaign. There's a lot of publishers who will actually fund the Kickstarter campaign in the first day, using the money they would have invested anyway, so that it gets promoted.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's great to hear that that your Kickstarter campaign got funded and that you hit early access and got a positive response as a self-published indie studio. That is pretty amazing. Congrats again to that.
Thank you, thank you. That means a lot. It's so we did a lot of research before we made the jump as well, because
Mhm.
we speak to a lot of other indie devs of similar sizes and this sort of thing, and we basically realized that a lot of indie devs don't, all they want to do is make the game, and that's brilliant, and that's right and correct for those. But I'm one of those devs who I quite enjoy talking about it. I quite enjoy doing the marketing, and I the community side of it. So a lot of the time, people, the reason that they would go with the publisher is so that a lot of this kind of work, someone else is doing it. They don't have to think about it, and that's good for them. Whereas for me, I'd be a bit like, oh, I'm a bit upset. I kind of want to do that. So even there, it was like, okay, it just seems right for us, but it's not necessarily right for everybody.
Yeah, obviously, community management, managing a Discord and keeping it active, posting on social media and like the TikToks and YouTubes and all of that. It's a lot of work. So it's great to see that you're handling it pretty well. Like the trailers and the screenshots in the on the Steam page, for instance, look stellar. Are there any plans to release, by the way, the game also on other platforms or perhaps other storefronts?
We would love to. A lot of it is just dependent on the success of Trash Goblin on Steam. So when we're talking about porting to consoles and other platforms, it obviously it costs money, and so we just need to be confident that we will make that money back. I mean, the the playtime, the user reviews, I think we're sat at like 93 or 94% now of the most recent 30 days. All of it points to, hey, if we get it in front of people, they'll enjoy it. We'll find a market. So as soon as we've got confidence in the size of that audience, then we can think about the porting. But from the get go, we designed the whole game, and even down to like the version of Unity we're using, and the shader model version, and all this sort of stuff, so that it makes it portable to as many things as possible. We could feasibly port it to the Switch if we wanted to. It runs very nicely on the Steam Deck. It could even go to the Quest 2, right? All the Switch and the Quest 2 are remarkably similar in sort of terms of like the hardware that they limitations that they have. So we were always planning to make our lives easier if success comes a knocking, you know.
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting to hear that it's also going to be possibly easier to port this eventually, and it makes sense, obviously, that you would focus on the Steam release. Are there plans to release it possibly on like GOG, for instance, as well, since a lot of people care about like DRM free stuff and whatnot?
I mean, we would be very interested in that. I think there the overhead really is just it's another marketplace with another set of criteria and an amount of time that it would require to manage. Similarly, itch, right? You know,
Yeah,
there's a few places where it would make sense to, but I think we just have to be comfortable that it's not always like this cut and dry, but you know, essentially, our time and effort would be taken away from Steam proportional to how much effort we put into those platforms, and we just need to make sure that we are kind of sensible about that, and sort of we want to be fairly like when we're talking about self-publishing, we want a bit like a big publisher, you know, like a big sort of it's about the money and the timing and the audience numbers, and then when we're making the game, we act more like you know it's just about the ideas and the creativity and the love, and hopefully that works out quite well because we're the same people. But yeah, we just have to be very fiscally responsible, I suppose. You know, we have a team of people that we pay, and we want to make sure that carries on. And that it's been a tough time in the industry these last few
yeah,
years,
yeah.
and we don't want to be another statistic, especially not with Trash Goblin seemingly doing so well. So,
Especially not after 15 years. I mean,
well,
that's a
yeah,
long time.
yeah, we didn't get this old by making rash decisions. Let's put it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah. Yeah, there's you got to manage a shop, If you can't manage a studio, how are you going to manage a shop, right?
Exactly, exactly.
um, but yeah, like genuinely, the game is great. I would urge anyone as well that is seeing this at this point to check out the game for themselves. Are there any things that you'd like to tell others at this point of the interview?
Well, I mean, it's just been lovely to talk about the game, and I'm so glad to hear how it's gone down. I mean, one thing for us is that we feel like we've kind of lucked out. We've made this game that is at its heart quite a generous spirited game, you know, and it's about, you know, being nice to people and building kind of a world that you're happy to live in. And the community is a lovely community as a result. You know, we've made a nice game, we've attracted nice people to play it, and then we can talk to them on Discord and on our forums. It's just really remarkable to us, and it means a lot. And so, yeah, if any of it sounds appealing, and if you want to come and you know get involved and become one of the goblins, we just welcome one and all. But we've got a lot of exciting plans for it. The roadmap is I can't wait. The update that we're going to release, well, this month before Christmas, is huge. I just can't wait to see what people make of it. And yeah, yeah, onwards and upwards, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the updates, the last one we had was the beans one, where we
Mm.
got access to coffee, finally, the most important update, as well as the stash upgrades, obviously, and the pay what you can box, It reminded me a
Yeah.
bit of the sales box in Moonlighter,
Yes.
where you
Yeah.
sell
Yeah.
stuff at a loss, but at least you get some gold.
At least you get something. Exactly.
Yeah, stuff. Are there plans for more sort of mechanics like that, where you save some time, basically, or get extra time slots per day in the future as well that you can unlock over time, besides the
We
stove and coffee pot?
Yeah, we will. I think you mentioned earlier, you know, the cleaning um being something that is probably the least fun of the core mechanics, and I would agree. And so that's something that we want to like give players the ability to automate to some degree, but also we kind of want to do that across all of the mechanics, you know, probably. I think if you have one thing that you can automate, it probably makes sense. It feels right to do it across all of them. And we never want the player to be in a position where they like feel like they should or have to use the automation.
Hmm.
But we also want, you know, again, it's everyone plays for different reasons and in different ways. So we want to support people who are a bit more like, I just want to kind of get to the point where I've got the trinket and made the sale. Um, but yeah, we don't want to erode that kind of tactility entirely. We don't want to make it like a completely sort of you know effortless experience. There's still got to be a little element of the routine of running the shop, of doing the work, even if it's just minimized in the future. But yeah, a lot of it. I think it's going to be exciting seeing what we've got on the horizon.
It definitely sounds very exciting. Are there any items that are not in the game right now and that are not planned, or that you perhaps were thinking of, but that might just be too unrealistic to add to the game? Like any trinkets that would not make it past the other developers, but you personally would love to have them?
I think we very early on we decided that we would not have anything that ends up being part of like a bigger contraption. You're not building machines or that sort of thing, and that was probably one of the biggest, most sensible decisions we made, just in terms of limiting it to an object needs to be sort of whole and complete in and of itself. So we won't be doing any upcycling that turns into kind of you know uh, um, things with multiple functions or whatever. But in terms of like very specific stuff, I'm struggling to think. I think most of the time, if someone's vetoed something, or we've said no, we shouldn't do it, it's mostly because it doesn't fit the world
Yeah,
that we're
obviously.
building. The aesthetic, or it's too close to, um, or maybe it like could be something that suggests a function that we don't intend to. So, well, for example, I don't know if we'll ever put in a set of painter's brushes, because then it sort of says, well, why can't I use them? You know,
Mhm.
why can't I use these paintbrushes? I mean, that might be a bad example. Maybe we do end up doing it, but that is
Yeah,
that sort of thing where,
perhaps the
yeah,
brick by brick update is gonna introduce something like that. Who knows?
who knows? Who knows exactly? But I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, yeah, you've because you're touching these objects, and then the customers are coming in very, very specifically asking for them for like authentic reason. I think we just have to be careful about, we can't throw everything and anything in, but then it's also quite fun because a lot of the time we can just see people making mad things. And I know Pip, our narrative designer, spends quite a lot of time just coming up with oddness and then going, oh, that would actually really work well as a, this character would want one of those. How to make funny weird bunny masks and things like that. So it's a shame when we don't put everything in we want to, but also like a limitation is kind of a strength sometimes because it forces you to be creative.
Yeah, obviously. Well, thank you very much for your time. Everyone can check out Trash Goblin via the links in the description. The Steam page is there. The game is in early access. Plans to end go on into early access at some point, leaving early access in 2025. Though there is no clear date yet, as far as I know, right?
Not yet, not yet.
And yeah, I'm very excited about the game. I love shopkeeping sims, even ones that are more on the simpler side of things. I hope they add fishing to the game. Wink, wink. Because anything with fishing gets better. And yeah, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.